I should get a real job. But I'm not a salary man. I'm Salari, man. Gross. If you've been following me for a bit now, you'll know that I love baking. I'm always looking to expand my horizons by trying new and more difficult things simply to see if I'm capable of it. While I do enjoy a good challenge, one of my favorite things to make is a simple loaf of white bread. I first made it when I moved to America and found that store-bought bread was loaded with sugar. So I thought to myself, why not try making it? I found a recipe from a reputable baker and just went for it. White bread has 5 simple ingredients: 400 grams of bread flour, 8 grams of salt, 25 grams of unsalted butter, or about 30 milliliters of olive oil if you want a vegan option, 250 milliliters of cool water, and most importantly, 7 grams of active dry yeast. Other than those, the only thing you need is some time, patience, and a bit of elbow grease doesn't hurt, or a stand mixer if you're lazy like me. You mix up the ingredients in a single bowl and you add water and move them all around. That's where the magic happens. As the ingredients intermingle with one another, it creates a network of proteins, which is all these strings forming together. There's an interesting science behind the creation of bread, but little of this was known when it was first created. What makes bread fascinating to me is that despite its complexity, it's an ancient creation. It's old enough that there's no solid consensus on when it was invented. There's evidence that it could be as old as 30,000 years old, and after all that time, it's been a staple in cultures across the entire world, to the point where it's referred to in numerous religious texts. It's delicious, versatile, nourishing, and above all, underrated. Bread came into existence because some brilliant people millennia ago discovered the miracle of yeast and fermentation, and was born from the desire to create something new, different, and filling. So what's the difference between bread and something that you'd find at a 3-star Michelin restaurant? Fine dining is all about taking ingredients and discovering new and complex ways of turning them into a dish that the average person couldn't imagine. Some would even go as far as to say that it's art or even performance, since the way it's presented to a diner is often, well, performative. Like a magician's trick that you get to witness the result, but what happens behind the scenes is a mystery that heightens the reveal. The feeling of, how did they do that? They're made by people who want to elevate food beyond most people's understanding of it. But with the creation of food, there's always the question, what was the cost behind making it? And I'm not just talking about the monetary value, but the cost on an ecological, human, and societal scale. Is the creation and sale of fine dining worth it beyond its taste and presentation? I don't believe so. Philosophically, I am not a fan of fine dining and have never been to a fine dining restaurant. Some people might think that I lack credibility, but most people, like my wife and me, can't afford $600 per person for bite-sized dishes. Criticism should be allowed regardless of one's direct experience. I can critique the diamond industry without owning diamonds. The best chefs in the world have for years been cultivating and romanticizing the idea that unique and innovative dishes can only be created through excessive dedication to your work, spending every waking moment thinking about food, allowing yourself to be exploited for your labor with the aim of improving your art, and in many cases forming a cult-like attachment to the masters. There are 2 pieces of media I want to look at as part of this video, which explore the world of fine dining from different angles: the FX show The Bear and the 2022 film The Menu, directed by Mark Mylod and written by Seth Rice and Will Tracy. Both The Bear and The Menu have received widespread acclaim from both critics and audiences, especially The Bear, which is currently considered to be one of the best shows on television. The Bear's story goes between being a drama about family and the traumas that come with that, and what goes into the creation of complex dishes and running a restaurant. But as the show has progressed, there's been an increasing emphasis on its fine dining elements, including how incredible it is and its importance in the culinary world. For those of you who don't know, The Bear is about the young prodigy Carmen Bazzato, aka Carmy, who after years of training at some of the world's finest restaurants, returns home following the tragic death of his brother, and after inheriting his ailing sandwich restaurant, he aims to turn it around. When he first arrives at the restaurant, it's a bit of a mess. The staff are untrained and apathetic, the kitchen and dining area are a disaster, the food is sloppy, and Carmy's cousin Richie has been trying to run things in his own unique and terrible way, by which I mean yelling and getting in the way of everyone. I will say though that those sandwiches do look pretty damn good. On a few occasions, The Bear gives us an insight into Carmy's experiences during his time learning from world-class chefs, and it shows that part of this process meant withstanding the emotional abuse of Chef David Fields, played to perfection by Joel McHale. As Carmy painstakingly prepares elaborate dishes, Fields hovers over him, whispering insults into his ear, belittling his skills, questioning Carmy's presence in his kitchen, telling him that he's worthless, and other abusive behaviors. But Fields is the best, so Carmy puts up with it. McHale himself has said that the character of David Fields was based upon the real-life chef Thomas Keller. This happens early into season 1, and with its inclusion, many assume that The Bear was making a clear statement that the cost of becoming one of the best chefs in the world is too high for anyone, and that the methods some chefs use to cultivate talent are too toxic to justify the creation of haute cuisine. As the show progressed though, it seemed to step away from this thesis. Throughout the first season, my and many other people's assumption was that by working at a sandwich restaurant, Carmy would rediscover the value of creating simple, delicious foods that don't require intense prep and sourcing expensive, exotic ingredients, something which I personally like the idea of. But at the end of season 1, they made it clear that it wasn't going to be the case. The menu, on the other hand, revolves around an escort called Margot Mills, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, after she's invited by a client to a high-class exclusive restaurant on a secluded island, run by renowned chef Julian Slowik, played by Ralph Fiennes. After some time there, it becomes apparent that something much darker is afoot, and Slowik doesn't intend to let his diners leave the island alive, and produces a bespoke menu that reveals their secrets and vulnerabilities, with the final course being a performative piece in which he and his staff and all the diners perish. The film is sort of a dark comedy, and as you can guess, a satirical take on the world of fine dining. It looks at how it's seen by outsiders, people who worship chefs, food critics that determine the success of restaurants, and of course, the wealthy, including those who see art as something to be exploited to earn money. The Bear and the Menu have a similar thesis on the creation of food, but clearly differ in various ways. The Menu is a critique on what the dining experience and the culture surrounding it has become, whereas The Bear kind of oscillates between examining the flaws of fine dining and borderline worshipping it. As I said a moment ago, The Bear begins with Carmy inheriting his brother's struggling sandwich restaurant. Carmy tries to turn things around using his culinary experience by buying quality ingredients with his limited funds, changing how things are run in the kitchen, training the other employees, and showing how they can do things better, even though none of them are really keen on the idea at first. They're all seemingly just fine making Italian beef sandwiches. Shortly after starting at the restaurant known as The Beef, aspiring chef Sydney Adamu applies for a job there, knowing that the prestigious chef Carmy has become the head chef and is understandably confused as to why he chose to work at The Beef, but nonetheless, she wishes to learn from him and takes the job. The restaurant also came with a substantial amount of debt, thanks to Carmy's late brother Mikey's mismanagement, who also borrowed money from their uncle Jimmy to start it up. Things are bad, and even though Kami does his best to improve the quality of the food and the efficiency of the kitchen, it's an uphill battle. That is, until he discovers a bunch of money Mikey left behind in some tomato sauce cans. Yummy botulism. With this substantial windfall, Kami and Sydney decide that instead of paying off the existing debt that the beef has, they'll use the money along with another loan from Uncle Jimmy, who is most definitely in the mob, to transform the beef into a fine dining establishment with the goal of earning 3 Michelin stars, which, as of 2024, only 153 restaurants in the world have that honor. So yeah, no pressure. With this change, Kami and Sydney's goal becomes clear: be among the best in the culinary world. You might expect that since the bear has illustrated how toxic the best kitchens in the world can be, that this will become a story in which these chefs learn that great things can be accomplished in a more stable environment. But Kami incorporates the toxicity learned from people like David Fields into his leadership, and despite there being some hints throughout the show that this isn't the way, it's not really leaned into enough. You see, fine dining restaurants in the real world have developed a reputation for their high-pressure, low-reward environments where anyone but the people at the top of the hierarchy have to tolerate harsh criticisms, various forms of toxicity, and some bizarre rules. The Danish restaurant Noma, run by René Redzepi, is a 3-star Michelin awarded restaurant and is considered one of the best dining establishments in the world that sells multiple course meals for as much as $500 US per person. Given Noma's prestige, you can imagine that aspiring chefs around the world would be eager for the opportunity to learn under the tutelage of one of the world's best chefs. The reality isn't so romantic though, as one ex-intern, Namrata Hedge, revealed to the New York Times that during her 3-month stint at Noma, her time was predominantly spent creating trompe-l'oeil beetles, which involve letting jam set using stencils to carve it into the shape of a beetle, which would then be served to customers in a glass case. She would prepare 120 of these beetles every day before service, while not learning much else in the process. But to top all of this off, not only was Namrata not paid for her internship, she was forbidden from laughing. If you're an aspiring chef, getting an internship at one of the world's best restaurants should be a dream come true. It's an opportunity to gain a seemingly endless wealth of knowledge from some of the most celebrated culinary geniuses in the world, but instead, people like Namrata end up doing work which is barely any different from working on a factory production line. An internship at a world-class restaurant is a big deal though. Yes, it looks great on a resume, but fine dining is extremely complicated and varied, so being asked to do one thing hundreds of times a week when there's thousands of other things to learn makes it a practically worthless experience, and literally worthless when you consider the lack of pay. Restaurants rely heavily on the labor of interns, and before the pandemic, it was reported that Noma had 34 paid cooks and around 30 interns, all unpaid. They later announced that they'll start paying their interns, but considering Redzepi recently announced that at the end of this year, Noma will be shutting down and instead focusing on global pop-up restaurants, it's too little, too late. The irony is that although Redzepi is aware of how awful it can be working in a kitchen and expresses his desire to avoid the abuse found in them, he doesn't exactly practice what he preaches. In an article published in The Lucky Peach back in 2015, Redzepi recalls how at the time he started cooking, it wasn't uncommon to see cooks getting slapped across the face for simple mistakes, plates thrown at people across the room for working too slowly, and even other chefs pulling awful pranks like leaving a pan handle over an open fire so that the next person who picked it up would scald their hand. It was bullying and abuse with the goal of teaching cooks that if you want to achieve the best results, then the possibility of suffering needs to be constantly hanging over their heads. Redzepi may not be as bad as his teachers, but if he's instructing his cooks to not laugh while not providing them with a decent variety of skills, then the spirit of those that he's learned from is still there. We as outsiders have sadly sort of accepted abusive chefs too, and even turned it into entertainment. I'm sure that many of you have seen and maybe even shared a clip or gif of Gordon Ramsay berating other chefs mercilessly on his shows. This is well known by this point, but Ramsay's behavior on his shows is heightened and choreographed for the sake of television, and if you watch any of his British produced shows, you'll see a man with a drastically toned down personality.
It's an amazing place, an amazing setting. I see someone that is hurting.
Yeah.
For what reason? Glory days, Michelin star?
Possibly.
Not as look at me in the eyes! Not as pissed as I am! You are! Donkey!
Ramsay's portrayal of the megalomaniacal, perfectionist chef has helped normalize the idea that chefs who have achieved a certain level of excellence not only have the right to abuse those below them, but that enduring it will encourage them to become excellent as a result. Personally though, I don't think that anyone that makes a grilled cheese sandwich that looks like this has any right to call themselves a chef. In the menu, Julian Slowik is the egomaniac chef taken to an extreme. His staff practically see him as a god and have a cult-like level of obedience, literally placing their lives on the line for him. His status as one of the world's best chefs has led him to becoming worshipped by admirers and aspiring cooks, to the point where he has complete influence over them. It's disturbing to watch Julian and his subordinates at work, but there are parallels to real-life kitchens, where head chefs hover over the shoulders of their cooks and respond with a chorus of "Yes, chef!" whenever they're given a command. Julian's motivations and actions are mysterious, which makes it all the more unnerving. He's begun to loathe his patrons, both the ones who refuse to understand his art and the ones who revere him. The menu doesn't offer any explanation as to how Julian reached this point, which adds to the film's mystery, and it doesn't explain how his staff came to be so devoted to him that they go along with this multi-course kamikaze menu, but it speaks to the level of cult-like behavior within the kitchens ran by the world's greatest chefs. If these cooks wish to become brilliant themselves, then they must follow the orders of their god. Much like real cults, some of the world's best kitchens use similar tactics as them to indoctrinate their staff into their ways, and by this I mean emotionally breaking them down to rebuild them into the kind of person who will unquestioningly follow orders. Clinical psychologist Dr. Margaret Thaler Singer laid out the criteria and behaviors for a group or organization to be considered a cult that attempts to take control over a person's thinking and thought patterns, and every one of these correlates to what you will see in many fine dining establishments. First is to keep a person unaware of how they're being changed. In a kitchen, this means creating an environment in which a chef has little to no control over their own actions and submitting to the demands of the head chef. By going along with this, a person in turn can be rewarded by affirmations, including being told how they have potential to be great. Then there's controlling a person's social and/or physical environment, along with their time. Kitchens often require absurd work schedules, where cooks have to work weeks that can be upwards of 80 hours long. That commitment can be praised or even seen as a source of pride, but in the process they can end up becoming further detached from the reality outside of the kitchen. This leads into the next step, creating a sense of powerlessness in a person. By removing them from their family, friends, and other outsiders, they become normalized to the kitchen environment, where others celebrate unhealthy work-life balances, along with accepting varying levels of toxicity from head chefs and other colleagues. Next is what's referred to as the sacred science. Everything within the group or kitchen is considered to be the ultimate truth, which is held above all other truths found outside of the kitchen. Any beliefs or experiences to the contrary are either denied or reinterpreted to fit their environment. As the holder of the truth, the leader, i.e. the head chef, is above question or criticism. You do as they say, no questions asked. To uphold all of this, there also needs to be a system of punishments and rewards to promote learning the ideology of the group, their belief systems, and going along with the approved behaviors. When someone in the kitchen behaves well, they can be rewarded with praise or even having one of their creations put on the menu. If someone were to offer criticisms, misbehave, or even question the group, that in turn can be met with punishment. The head chef is above all else. In the context of the kitchen, they are God, and this God doesn't want to hear what their followers have to offer. They don't want to hear their thoughts on how to innovate. They just want obedience, a group of competent chefs who are willing to follow every command that comes from their mouth, because the head of the kitchen knows the secret to the universe. Just go along with what they say and only reply with, "Yes, chef." All of this is done in the name of food. The menu exemplifies all of this system to an extreme. The chefs in Julian's kitchen are without doubt a cult, and it's not too far removed from the reality of many kitchens around the world. Even though Julian and his staff are in essence a death cult, the menu highlights how it's not just the culture in the kitchen that's flawed, but the diners themselves who have transformed fine dining into what it is now, a pretentious, costly experience which is either revered too much or underappreciated. It's become something which the wealthy consume because it's expected of them, but it's lost any meaning to them as well. It's a thing tech bros do so they can brag about it to their co-workers, and something that has its success determined by aggressively picky food critics. People that are just there because the name attached to the restaurant and the prestige that comes with it. The Bear, on the other hand, seems to want to uphold these values. It treats prestige as a desirable goal and wants to cater to the kind of people we see in the menu. I understand and accept that the creators of The Bear are well within their rights to share their love of fine dining and everything that comes with it, but when it comes to the cost of it, be it financial, human, or other, in today's world where we're beginning to recognize and rightfully judge what goes into the creation of something, it seems oddly irresponsible of the show. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how fine dining is one of many high-class industries which is led and staffed predominantly by white men. In the UK, only 10 of the 172 restaurants with a Michelin star are led by women head chefs, and of the over 250,000 professional chefs there, only 18.5% are women. This disparity translates into other groups, with the industry seriously lacking in diversity, both in the kitchen and among head chefs, an issue which is compounded when you consider the industry's tendency to dabble with culturally appropriated dishes. Chef Kwame Onwuachi tells of how he went from being a child in the Bronx who learned to cook from his mother, who ran a catering company, to running his own restaurant, which opened and shut down within 3 months, and his time working in Per Se under Chef Thomas Keller. Kwame explains how, during his time at Per Se, the racism he faced was never so transparent that he was directly called racial slurs, but it became evident from his treatment that he was treated as an outsider and discriminated against in more subtle ways. In the memoir, he says,
"I felt like I was being called the N-word with no one actually saying it. No one had to, and maybe they were smart to. So it was left to me to decide whether it was because I was black or because I was just me, that I was the only one greeted with a growling, 'Get the fuck back in the prep kitchen,' when I ran food out to the chefs in the line."
In The Bear, Chef Sydney, a black woman, is given the role of sous chef, and upon their transition into becoming a fine dining establishment, she and Kami come to the agreement that she would have an equal say in how things are run and what goes onto the menu. She's clearly extremely talented and passionate about her craft, but it eventually becomes clear that Kami doesn't want to consider any decisions made by Sydney or anyone else in the kitchen. What he says goes. Despite racial discrimination being endemic in the industry, The Bear doesn't really capitalize on the opportunity to illustrate the challenges people of color face in the kitchen. It almost feels incidental that Sydney is black and a woman, since Kami dismisses her as much as he does anyone else, with the key difference being that she's supposed to be a partner in the restaurant. Like many aspects of the show, it feels almost irresponsible. The bear identifies the problems with fine dining, from the abuses to the unsustainability, gentrification, and even racial bias, but it never really comes close to asking why these things exist, why they're considered acceptable by so many people, and what can be done to make them better. Instead, the bear takes every opportunity to glamorize fine dining, portraying it as a noble art which is born through suffering. It's a frustrating experience since it knows the problems, but it doesn't want the audience to think about it too much because the food is so pretty. I know that this is my bias speaking, but I think that any product that examines an industry which exists almost entirely to cater to the wealthy and is guilty of gentrification, all while exploiting the poor and elevating the privileged, should have the responsibility to make its audience aware of its faults. The Menu may have its faults as a movie, and it's a little bit heavy-handed, but it struck a good balance. Fine dining is a genuinely impressive and special thing, but the culture surrounding it has perverted its intention to create something beautiful and new. It sucked the joy out of experimentation and making things people love from many chefs around the world who have said that they have no regrets whatsoever about leaving their jobs. In an op-ed written by ex-chef Genevieve Yam, she details how she left the industry after being diagnosed with fibromyalgia, a stress-induced pain disorder for which there is no definitive treatment. Before then, she was working 70-hour weeks, plucking herbs, dehydrating purees, simmering juices into reductions for dinners that cost $425 US per person, and for her efforts she was paid only $15 an hour. After being a once proud chef who relished the opportunity to work in a world-class kitchen, it was only upon being forced to leave by her illness that she realized that none of it was worth it, and many of her peers agree with her. In the article, Genevieve says, "As I reflect on my time in the hospitality industry, I'm relieved to watch as the most exclusive, often most exploitative fine dining restaurants finally seem to be going out of fashion. It couldn't come soon enough." The funny thing is, even with their expensive menus and months-long waits for diners to get a table there, these restaurants can't sustain themselves financially. When you take into account the cost that goes into fine dining, including the heavily populated kitchens with chefs who have to get by on terrible pay, elaborate high-end equipment, costly and hard to acquire ingredients, and the amount of food that's wasted, they're not sustainable in the slightest. It's bad enough that some chefs even say that it's impossible for an establishment to survive without free labor. Fine dining will always exist, and obviously it will have to find ways to survive since what it is right now can't continue. Regardless of how special a dish is, any amount of exploitation, discrimination, and abuse does not justify its existence, and we shouldn't convince aspiring chefs that tolerating workplace toxicity is a necessary step to becoming brilliant. After all, these prestigious chefs are still just humans, and if they're worthy of being called an arsehole, then they should work on being less of an arsehole. Food is a beautiful thing, and beauty can be found in the simple. It's why I love bread, because it's a simple idea that has had more influence on food around the world than anything that you can find in the kitchens run by the world's greatest chefs. It can be transformed into all kinds of things, and it's nourishing. It literally makes you feel good. Oh, and if you fancy learning how to make this bread yourself, I actually made a video of it on my Patreon for supporters, so check that out if you want to give it a go. Not only is it nourishing, but it can be made by anyone. Only 5 simple ingredients you can pick up at any grocery store, and after a few hours you have something that you can be proud of. Fine dining is the illusion of pride, propped up by the environments that warp the minds of young chefs to believe that a tiny ounce of validation from the masters is the most meaningful thing in the world. The world of fine dining upholds the idea that pain and suffering are integral to the creation of great art, which is something people have believed to be true for as long as we can remember. The simple fact, though, is that great art can be made without pain. In our society, we see pain as a necessary component for great art because it's marketable to those who wish to invest in it. Pain is a tool that gives something more value when it's produced by the privileged, because unlike someone working in a factory for next to no pay, these chefs have the choice to incorporate suffering as a unique selling point, and it's a disgusting, unnecessary romanticization of the artistic process. Fine dining shouldn't exist as it is, and from the looks of it, it seems as though it won't be able to continue existing for very long since it's so unsustainable. I know that the majority of you haven't sampled fine dining before, so maybe I'm wasting my breath about this, but I was rubbed the wrong way by the bear's reverence of the field and felt like talking about it. And who knows, maybe the show will prove me wrong and Kami will one day go back to making sandwiches and find his happiness. But even if you're unable to afford the fine dining experience or aren't interested in it, the next time you eat, take a moment to appreciate the beauty and joy of something simple. There's a reason why people say it's the best thing since sliced bread, because it's so damn good.
Thank you for watching. I don't know if you can tell from my Vin Diesel voice, but I'm quite sick right now. But YouTube's algorithm doesn't like it when small creators take breaks for their health, so here I am. Thanks to all the people who support me at patreon.com/Salari, and a shout out to the ones who donate $5 or more. Rima, Rowan Ellis, Texas Lioness, Martin Chung, Femgirl Aaron, MD Bagel, JP, Minty, Malcontent, Jacob Mayer, Zoe B, Fishcatch, Meg, Beige Circle, Jonathan Morris, Aria Rose, Bailey Grevling, Catherine Pandel, Dan McCrary, Remy Allen, Lizzie Peasy, Grant B, Enrique Gutierrez, Mergerger Fashionable, Alina, R. Atoms, Sparrowwagon, The Dia Prince, El Salvador Dali, Syndrome Noir, Tadeo De Oria, Ryan Osterman, Jay, Cami, Catherine, Dio, Colin, Patrick McBain, Gina I, Gay Frogs Collective, Ruby O'Connor, David, Vertex, Emily Argentine, The Paultism, Haplo, Tanda, Locked In, Kevu, Gertz Weinreich, and Selen. Thank you all for your kind support. Sorry this video took a long time to come out, but I've had some stuff going on. I stream every Wednesday here on YouTube at 2 PM Eastern. I have a Discord server anyone can join, and you can find me on Blue Sky. All links can be found below. Thank you for watching once again. If you made it this far, leave a comment saying Vindibus. Sure. I'm going to bed. Take care.